Welcome to 3:15 o'clock, that very channel where the unspoken becomes unforgettable. Do you have the courage to explore the stories they always wanted to hide from you? This is not just a horror channel. This is a place where silence is shattered by secrets, and every story carries a weight of fear it was never meant to bear. The first story, the Midnight Silence Rule. Rule number 4 in this godforsaken hostel in the middle of bumfuck Kansas was scribbled by hand on a piece of paper taped to the door. Absolute silence from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. No talking, no noise. They won't wake up. My roommate in the 8-bed dorm and I had a good laugh about it, figuring the owner was just a whack job. Right at midnight, the door creaked open. In walked the owner himself. He wasn't breathing. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and he slowly, real slow, started making the rounds, leaning over the sleeping figures as if listening. My name's Leo, and in that moment I realized I'd been laughing at my own epitaph. It wasn't just a laugh, it was that cocky, city slicker dismissal of something I couldn't wrap my head around. Now I'd have given anything to take that laugh back and choke on it, just to unsee that door sliding inward, letting the nightmare in. It all started with a flat tire. Somewhere in the middle of this endless, flat as a pancake Kansas, my beat-up Honda gave a sad little thump and crawled onto the shoulder. No spare. I'd always put off buying one. Now that later had a shape and a smell. The nearest town was 40 miles away. Sunrise was 6 hours off. In the glow of my phone flashlight, which was blinking frantically with a low battery warning, I saw a weathered, crooked billboard. Crossroads Hostel. Cheap, a roof for the night. An arrow pointed down a gravel road leading into the pitch black. It wasn't a road. It was a gullet. The Crossroads was a 2-story shed painted a long faded yellow, the color of old teeth. Inside it smelled of dust, rotting wood, and something sweetly medicinal like an old-timey dentist's office. The owner's name was Elijah, tall, gaunt, with skin like old parchment stretched so tight over his cheekbones you thought it might tear. He took my cash. Why only cash? He'd mumbled something about bad service and handed me a cold, heavy key to room number 2. Rules are on the door, he grunted, and his eyes slid over me in a weird appraising way. Not like an owner sizing up a guest, but like a butcher sizing up a side of beef. The room was a capsule for the broke, a mass grave for the living. 4 bunk beds with sagging springs, stained mattresses, a single dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. Of the 7 potential roomies, only one was there, a guy named Mark, around 25, huddled in a corner with a book. He seemed normal, just road-weary. It was Mark who first pointed out the note. "Get a load of this," he smirked, but there was no humor in it. "They won't wake up," straight out of a B-movie. "You think the old guy's a few fries short of a happy meal? Or maybe he just hates rowdy college kids," I offered, still playing the civilized guy for whom the world was a logical, safe book. We chuckled, quietly ate some candy bars for dinner, and I climbed into the top bunk opposite Mark. From below came the wet, gurgling snore of a trucker who'd buried himself under his blanket. Another guest, an Asian girl, was already asleep, facing the wall, her posture unnaturally rigid. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. A sense of dread was building with every minute, like the air before a storm. The air in the room was thick, stagnant, hard to breathe. 5 minutes to midnight, the snoring stopped dead. At 11:55 on the dot, it didn't trail off. It was cut off mid-breath. A silence fell so deep I could hear my own teeth grinding, the blood pounding in my temples. This wasn't just an absence of sound. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath. Then, right at midnight, without a single preliminary creak, the lock clicked, and the door slid open, and Elijah walked in. But it wasn't the Elijah who'd checked me in. That one had moved sharply, spoken in a clipped way. This one was an empty shell. He didn't walk. He floated an inch above the floor. His legs didn't bend. His feet slid over the dirty linoleum without a whisper. His eyes, the ones that had appraised me, were now rolled back so far only the whites showed, veined with bloody cracks. His mouth was slightly open, but no breath came out. None. Just the silence radiating from him in waves pressing on my eardrums. He went to the first bunk where the trucker was. His neck bent with an unnatural bird-like grace. He leaned down, bringing his ear to within inches of the sleeper's face. He froze. I froze with him. My heart was hammering so loud I thought it was echoing off the walls. He stood like that for an eternity. Then, with the same fluid, mechanical precision, he straightened up and moved on. My eyes met Mark's. They were wide, but it wasn't just terror. It was a bottomless pit of understanding, of despair, of a silent scream. I told you. I knew he got it without a single word. The rule was no joke. It was the only law in this pocket of hell. Elijah approached the Asian girl's bunk. The same dispassionate procedure: lean, freeze, straighten. He was like a wind-up mannequin programmed for one terrible repeating ritual. He turned and glided toward us. I pressed myself into the mattress, trying to become part of the wall. I felt cold sweat trickling down my back. Elijah stopped at Mark's lower bunk. He leaned down. His gray, lifeless hair almost brushed Mark's forehead. I saw Mark's body tense to its breaking point, but a willpower, hardened by what I would later understand was not his first such night, held him in a steel vice. He lay perfectly still, not breathing, a statue of pure fear. Elijah froze. The silence became a physical thing, a lead blanket thrown over the room. My own mind started to betray me. A high-pitched ring, tinnitus born from absolute silence, started in my ears, and I began to imagine whispers in it. And then came the sound, a quiet, treacherous buzz, my phone vibrating. I'd forgotten to put the damn thing on silent. Some stupid weather notification, a message from another normal world. The whites of Elijah's eyes twitched. A tiny movement, but in the total stillness it was a gunshot. He didn't turn his head. He slowly, with a nasty multi-part crunch of vertebrae, raised it and stared right at me. The white blind orbs were aimed in my direction. They weren't seeing me, but I felt him sense me, like a bat with sonar. He sensed the vibration, the sonic ripple I'd created. A sound escaped his slightly open mouth, like the hiss of a punctured tire slowly leaking something thick and ancient. It wasn't breath, it was an awakening, the first click of a safety being released. He didn't move. Instead, from the corner of the room, a figure rose. The same girl who'd been sleeping facing the wall. Her movements were just as fluid and lifeless, but now with a new purpose. Her eyes were also rolled back. She turned and drifted toward my bunk, moving like a snake under hypnosis. My breath hitched. Now there were two of them. Mark below me squeezed his eyes shut, his face a mask of utter consuming horror. I understood. We'd disturbed the balance. We'd attracted attention. The girl stopped at the head of my bunk. She leaned in. Her long black hair hung down, almost touching my face. She smelled of that same sickly, sweet, medicinal odor, but stronger now. The smell of formaldehyde and decay covered by cheap floral cologne. I shut my eyes, pretending to sleep, trying to control every muscle, every pore. I was even afraid to blink. She froze. I felt her presence like an ice-cold spot an inch from my nose. Minutes stretched into eternities. Then I heard the rustle of her clothes. She straightened up, but she didn't leave. She remained standing beside my bunk, her blind eyes fixed on me. Elijah, meanwhile, had taken up a position by Mark's bed. They had us surrounded. We were the center of their silent universe. We were trapped. The slightest sound and they would wake up fully. I didn't know what that meant. But my adrenaline-fueled imagination painted the worst pictures. Claws, fangs, bottomless mouths that consumed not flesh, but sound itself, life itself. And then a sound came from the top bunk in the far corner. A quiet, stifled sob. Someone else was there. A guy I hadn't even noticed. He was so quiet. His psyche, more fragile than ours, had finally snapped under the strain. Elijah and the girl turned their heads in perfect, synchronized unison toward the sound. Their movement was perfectly coordinated, like a pack of predators scenting blood. The crying intensified. It was the sound of a mind breaking under an unbearable reality. Elijah moved away from Mark's bunk and floated toward the crying man. The girl stayed with me. I lay there, not daring to move, staring into her dead white eyes. And now, up close, I saw something moving in their murky whiteness. A shadow, not a reflection. Something living inside behind the white film. It was stirring, attracted by the sound. Elijah ascended to the top bunk. I couldn't see, but I could hear. The crying cut off abruptly, replaced by a short gurgling sound, like a mouth being stifled. Then came a soft, wet crunch. 1, 2. The sound was quiet, efficient. Horribly so. A dead silence fell. Even more oppressive than before, now filled with the horror of what had just happened. Elijah descended. His lips and chin were wet and dark in the dim light. He resumed his position in the center of the room, freezing like a statue. The girl finally moved away from my bunk and stood beside him. Mark beneath me let out a quiet, almost soundless exhale. It wasn't a sigh of relief. It was a groan of despair. I understood we hadn't just witnessed an execution. It was a purification ritual. The noisemaker had been dealt with, and we were next in line if we made a peep, and so began the longest night of my life. A night that stretched into an eternity. The next 2 hours were pure torture by awareness. I lay in one position, my muscles numb and burning, sending pain signals to my brain that I ignored like static. Sleep was impossible. Adrenaline pounded in my temples. I started praying for my heart to beat quieter, to just stop, so it wouldn't give me away. Elijah and the girl didn't move. They just stood and listened. But I knew someone else was in the room. The trucker. He was lying perfectly still, and I suddenly realized he wasn't just sleeping. He was pretending, just like us. He knew the rules. Everyone in that room except me, Mark, and the poor crier knew the drill. They were part of this system, or its victims learned to survive, to blend into the background. Suddenly, a spring creaked on the trucker's bed. Barely audible, but in the tomb-like silence, it was a cannon shot. Elijah and the girl instantly turned toward the sound. The trucker froze. I saw his blanket trembling slightly. The girl drifted to his bed. She leaned over him. A minute passed, then another. Then a pale, bony hand reached for his face. Her finger slid down to his neck and rested on his carotid artery. She wasn't listening with her ear. She was listening with her finger, feeling for a pulse. The trucker didn't move. He had turned to stone, and then the girl made that same hissing sound. But this time there was something else in it. Disappointment, hunger. She straightened up and returned to her post. The trucker had survived. This time, the cost of survival was a few years of life, siphoned away by adrenaline and fear. I stared at the ceiling, trying to count seconds. My internal clock was broken by fear. It was 2:45. 1 more hour. A whole hour in this hell. It seemed impossible, and then I felt the urge. A terrible, overwhelming physical urge to piss. Fear had my bladder in a steel grip. But biology is a brutal master. The pressure was becoming a separate, agonizing source of pain. I knew I couldn't hold out until 4. I tried to shift the pressure, moving my hip a microscopic amount. The spring under the mattress let out a tiny, high-pitched squeak. Elijah and the girl were facing me again. This time they moved in unison. They glided to my bunk and stood on either side of it like a funeral detail. I knew this was it. I'd broken the rule. I was guilty. A new sound came from Elijah's throat, a low, gurgling growl. He leaned over me. His face was centimeters from mine. I could smell that sweet rotten breath, and I saw the shadows in the depths of his eyes moving faster, agitated by the new prey. And then something happened that made my mind crack, finally and irrevocably. His rolled-back pupil twitched, and for one fleeting instant dropped down. I saw a sliver of his iris, murky gray like a dead fish, and in that stolen glance I didn't see malice or hunger. I saw despair, an infinite cosmic fatigue, and a warning, a silent scream from a soul trapped inside that shell. Lie still. For God's sake, lie still. Then the pupil rolled back up and he straightened. The shadow of consciousness was gone, replaced by blind automatism. They didn't touch me. They just stood there closer than ever, waiting for me to make the fatal mistake. They'd given me a chance they themselves might no longer remember. Tears streamed down my temples onto the pillow. I made no sound. I clenched my jaw until I thought my teeth would crack. Suddenly, from downstairs, an alarm clock went off. Someone's phone. A rattling, insistently cheerful ringtone tore through the silence like a bomb. Elijah and the girl jerked violently. Their limbs shook in a strange, uncoordinated dance. An inhuman roar erupted from their throats, a mixture of hissing, grinding, and a shriek of rage. They lunged for the door, moving not smoothly but with a terrifying spider-like speed, and vanished into the dark hallway. A blood-curdling scream came from downstairs, cut off abruptly. Then the sound of a body hitting the floor. The room was silent again, but differently now. Tense waiting, I didn't dare move. Right at 4 o'clock, a relay clicked somewhere. The hall light brightened slightly. I heard normal night sounds, a floorboard creaking, water dripping. It was over. I risked turning my head. Mark was alive, his eyes empty. The trucker sat up slowly, his face aged 10 years. He looked at me and slowly brought a finger to his lips. Not yet. I looked at the far top bunk, where the crier had been. A large dark stain spread across the sheet. The bunk was empty. In the morning, we packed in silence. Elijah wasn't at the front desk. An elderly woman with tired eyes was there instead. "Elijah isn't feeling well," she said, her hands trembling as she gave me my change. I wanted to scream to call the cops, but I looked at Mark. He shook his head. His eyes said it all. "They won't believe us. And if they do, we'll break the silence." We stepped outside. The air was clean and sharp. The trucker drove off without a look back. Mark and I stood by my Honda. The tire was fixed. Someone had fixed it in the night. In context, this simple act was the creepiest thing of all. It wasn't kindness. It was a message. We need you whole. So you can leave. So you can keep quiet. "What the hell was that, Leo?" Mark asked, his voice ragged. "I don't know," I said, my own voice a rusty croak. "But they didn't want to kill us." "Not right away. They were patrolling, guarding something, or just guarding the silence itself." Mark nodded. "The rule was for our protection, from whatever would wake up if we made noise. Elijah and that girl, they're not the monsters. They're the guards, jailers in their own prison." We drove off without goodbye. I never stayed in a cheap roadside hostel again, but sometimes deep in the night, when a floorboard creaks or my alarm goes off softly, I freeze. The reflex drilled into me in one night kicks in. I lie perfectly still, holding my breath, and listen to the silence. And I get this feeling that somewhere out there in the dark, just on the other side of reality, someone is slowly, very slowly, turning their head in my direction, and waiting. Always waiting for me to make a sound loud enough to be heard, loud enough to wake it up. The second story. The downstairs party. The party at the NYC Transit Hostel never died down. The music thumped through the floor like a minor earthquake. At 3 a.m. I'd had enough. I stormed downstairs to tell them to turn that shit down. The common room was empty, lights off, but the music was still blasting from speakers glowing in the dark. And in the center of the room, 10 people stood perfectly still, their backs to me. They weren't dancing. They were just standing there. And as one, perfectly in sync, they were nodding their heads to the beat. My name's Jacob, but everyone calls me Jake. And in that moment, standing in that doorway, I knew I'd made a mistake on par with willingly checking into a portal to hell. The NYC Transit was the last stop for people who'd run out of money, hope, or both. It was in the heart of Brooklyn, in a building that looked like it was about to collapse from sheer exhaustion. But inside, it was always alive, loud, obnoxious, and relentless. My move to New York wasn't like in the movies. Instead of an apartment with a Manhattan view, I got an 8-bunk shoebox on the 3rd floor that smelled like stale beer and despair. I told myself it was temporary, just part of the grind. My roommate, a German hippie named Klaus, met me at the door with a giant grin. "Welcome to the loudest house on the East Coast, man," he yelled over the bass. "The music never stops here. It's like the place's heartbeat." Heartbeat. Now I'd call it a death rattle. That first night I learned that sleep was a luxury the living couldn't afford here. The bass came through the walls, the floor, the pillow. It wasn't just sound. It was a physical feeling. A vibration that got into your bones, your teeth, the veins in your temples. It was a monotone electronic loop, no melody, just a pulse. Rhythmic, hypnotic, insane. On that final night, after 3 days of almost no sleep, I snapped. An adrenaline rush of pure rage overpowered the exhaustion. I slid down from the top bunk, feeling the floor vibrate under my feet. Klaus was awake. He was lying on his bottom bunk, staring at the ceiling with wide pupils. His fingers were tapping out that exact rhythm on the edge of his blanket. Thump, thump, pause. Thump, thump, pause. "Going down to the party?" he asked, not turning his head. His voice was weirdly flat, no inflection. "Going down to tell them to shut the hell up," I grumbled, pulling on my sneakers. His lips stretched into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was too wide, too forced. "Good luck. Tell them Klaus says hi." The stairs to the lobby were metal, and every step I took echoed, but the sound was instantly swallowed by the all-consuming beat. The lower I went, the thicker the air got, smelling of cheap body spray, sweat, and something sweet, almost rotten, like a giant candy had gotten stuck in the vents and started melting. I shoved the door to the common room open, ready for a fight, for chaos, for a crowd of drunk bodies. But what I saw made my brain short-circuit, trying to reject the information. The room was pitch black, except for the bluish glow of a laptop on a table, hooked up to massive speakers pumping out that devilish pulse. And they were there. Not 10, more like 12, maybe 15 people. They were standing in a near-perfect circle in the center of the room, backs to me, shoulder to shoulder. They weren't moving at all. Their poses were relaxed, but in a creepy, unnatural way. Only their heads were moving, nodding in perfect synchronized time with the music. Up, down. Up, down. Same rhythm, same angle. Like a row of mannequins in a store window, all controlled by the same hidden motor. No laughter, no clinking glasses, no drunk mumbling. Just the deafening thump and that creepy millisecond perfect synchronicity. This wasn't a party. It was a ritual. An ice-cold wave washed down my spine. Every instinct screamed, "Run!" But curiosity, that fatal flaw of every horror movie idiot, glued me to the spot. I took a step inside, and a floorboard creaked under my foot. Right on the next beat, everything froze. The head stopped nodding. The circle of bodies turned to stone. The music kept playing, but the movement had stopped, and that stillness was scarier than any sound. Then, with mechanical smoothness, all 15 people pivoted on the spot. They didn't take a step. They just turned like soldiers on a drill field, slowly, without moving their feet. I saw their faces. They were the same people I'd seen at breakfast, the smiley Australian couple everyone called A and K. The old Japanese guy with his fancy camera, the 2 chatty French students. But now their faces were blank, totally empty. No anger, no joy, not even simple curiosity. Their eyes looked right through me like I was a ghost, but all their heads were tilted at the same unnatural angle, like they weren't looking at me but scanning me. Then a voice came from behind me. Calm, almost gentle. "Jake, we've been waiting for you." I spun around. Klaus was standing in the doorway. That same creepy frozen smile was on his face. He hadn't followed me down. He was already here. What's going on?" I choked out, my voice weak and pathetic against the beat. "It's a becoming, friend," Klaus said, taking a step toward me. At the exact same time, all 15 people in the circle took a step toward me, perfectly in sync. We're becoming part of something bigger, letting go of the noise in our own heads. It's beautiful. Just join the rhythm. Stop fighting it. They weren't threatening me. They weren't clenching their fists. They were just approaching, with those empty eyes and stretched smiles, like a crowd of overly hospitable hosts trying way too hard. A pure, animal terror, cleaner and stronger than anything I'd ever felt, jerked me out of my stupor. I stumbled back, slammed my shoulder into the doorframe, and bolted into the hallway. I didn't run. I flew back up the stairs, taking them 2 or 3 at a time, not looking back, expecting a cold hand to grab my ankle any second. I burst into our room, slammed the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. I waited for shouts, for pounding on the door, for them to try and break it down. But all I heard from below was the same monotone beat. And silence on the stairs. I slowly exhaled, a hysterical hope bubbling up. Had I imagined it? Was it some kind of prank, a stupid joke? I turned and looked into the room. That hope died before it was fully born. The room was empty. Not just empty, sterile. All 7 other bunks were neatly made, blankets tucked in military tight. Not a single personal item on the nightstands, no backpacks, no suitcases, like my roommates had never existed. It was still pitch black outside. Dawn was hours away. Only on my pillow, right where my head had been, was a perfectly clean, neatly folded piece of paper. I picked it up with a shaking hand and unfolded it. 3 words were printed in a crisp typeset font. Get quiet, listen, join in. And then I understood the true horror. The music from downstairs wasn't just still playing. It had gotten quieter. That monotone pulse was barely audible now, but that made it even more insidious, even deeper. It was worming its way into my head, and through it, I heard a new sound. A multitude of soft, shuffling footsteps. They weren't coming from downstairs. They were right outside my door. In the hallway, they were already here, on my floor. They hadn't come up to grab me. They'd come up to surround me, to wait, patiently. I rushed to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the shuffling didn't stop. It was everywhere, to the right, to the left, from below. I jerked back like I'd been burned. My breathing became fast and shallow. Panic, cold and sticky, tightened around my throat. I scrambled for my phone. Battery dead. I frantically searched my backpack pockets for the charger. Nothing. It was gone, too. So was my wallet. They'd taken everything that could help me. They'd left only me and that note. Get quiet, listen, join in. I went to the window. We were on the 3rd floor. Jumping was certain death or maiming. The fire escape was at the other end of the hall. Where the shuffling was, suddenly the music got louder again. Just a couple of decibels, but enough to make me jump. And in time with the increase, something happened in the hall. The footsteps stopped. A silence fell, broken only by the obsessive pulse. Then came a knock, soft, polite. On my door. Jake? It was Klaus's voice. The same calm, friendly tone. Open up, please. We're worried about you. I pressed my back against the wall next to the door, holding my breath. We know you're scared. Another voice continued. It wasn't Klaus now. It was a soft female voice with an Australian accent. Okay. It's okay. We were all scared at first. But then you see how beautiful it is. No more loneliness. No more doubt. You're not alone, added another voice, young French. We're all here. We're all together. They were speaking in turns like they were passing an invisible microphone. Their voices sounded normal, human, and that made it so much worse. Just open the door, Jake. Klaus's voice came again. Don't make us worry. We want to help you. I stayed silent, clenching my fists until my knuckles were white. My heart was pounding wildly, and I was sure they could hear it through the thin door. Suddenly, the music changed again. The rhythm stayed the same, but a new layer was added. A quiet, whispering voice layered over the beat. It was so faint I couldn't make out words, but the tone was hypnotic, lulling. And then I felt a strange heaviness in my eyelids. The exhaustion I'd been fighting off with adrenaline came crashing down with a new, irresistible force. It wasn't just sleepiness. It was a physical sensation, like a heavy, warm weight was being placed on my shoulders. Get quiet. Listen. The music and the whisper were crawling into my brain, pushing out the panic, replacing it with an apathetic resignation. No, I screamed at myself internally. I pushed off the wall and desperately scanned the room for a weapon and escape anything. My eyes landed on a detached bedpost leaning in the corner. I grabbed it. Flimsy comfort, but better than nothing. The knock came again, louder this time. More insistent. Jake! Klaus's voice lost its friendly veneer. A steely note crept in. Last chance. Open the door the easy way. I clutched the iron bedpost to my chest, bracing for the worst. I expected them to shoulder charge the door. They didn't. Instead, I heard a new sound. The scrape of a key being inserted into the lock. They had a key. Of course they did. This was their hostel, their trap. I stumbled back toward the window, knowing this was it. The lock clicked. The door swung open slowly, silently. No one was in the doorway. The hall was empty. I froze, not understanding, and then I saw them. They were standing further down the hall, a tight group. All the same faces. Klaus, AK, the Japanese guy, the French girls. They weren't looking at me. They were staring at the floor in front of them. Their arms hung at their sides, and they were swaying, slightly back and forth, in time with the same beat. They weren't going to attack. They were just waiting. From behind them stepped the old Japanese man. He wasn't holding his camera. He was holding a small, old-fashioned metronome. He walked to the very threshold of my room, placed the metronome on the floor, and started it. A quiet, mechanical tick-tock, tick-tock merged with the music, amplifying the rhythm. Then he lifted his eyes to me. And for the first time all night, I saw something in someone's gaze other than emptiness, a deep, bottomless sadness, and a warning. He shook his head slowly, almost imperceptibly, not in time with the beat, the way you shake your head to say no. Then he turned and went back to the group, resuming his swaying. That was the final nail in my coffin. They weren't just zombies. Shreds of themselves were still trapped inside those obedient bodies, and that thought was more terrifying than any monster. The music grew louder again. The whisper became clearer. Now I understood the words. The same phrase over and over. You are not alone. We are here. Join us. Find peace. I felt my fingers loosen. The iron bedpost clattered to the floor with a crash that nobody seemed to notice. My eyelids became leaden. My legs buckled, and I slowly slid down the wall under the window. I didn't want to fight anymore. The terror was still there, but it was replaced by an all-consuming apathy, sweet and poisonous like carbon monoxide. I watched the metronome. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Its rhythm matched the beating of my heart, or was my heart starting to beat in its rhythm? I saw Klaus step through the door. He walked over to me and held out his hand. There was no smile on his face now, just a calm, almost paternal expectation. "It's okay, Jake," he said. His voice was the only sound besides the rhythm. "It's okay. Just stand up." I stood up. My movements were slow, sluggish. He put a hand on my shoulder and gently turned me toward the door. "Now walk," he said, and I walked. I stepped out into the hallway. They were standing there, forming a living corridor leading to the stairs. Their empty eyes watched me pass. I walked down back to the common room. The music was louder here, but it didn't grate on my ears anymore. It was soothing. The circle was still there in the center of the room. There was a space left for me. I stepped into the circle, back to the center like all the others. I closed my eyes, and I just started to listen to the rhythm. "Get quiet, listen," and then I felt it. A foreign weight at the back of my skull, a warm, pulsing presence that slowly pushed out my thoughts, my fears, my me. It didn't hurt. It was like sinking into a warm bath, like coming home. Join in. My head began to nod on its own, up, down, in perfect rhythm, in our rhythm. The last thought I managed to form, before my mind completely dissolved into the collective pulse, was, they were right. This really is the best soundtrack in the city. The disappearance of myself wasn't a dissolution. It was a suffocation. I stood in the circle, my head lolling to that cursed beat. But inside, a tiny, cold shard of consciousness remained. The last corner of Jake not yet captured by the hypnotic pulse. It didn't think. It only felt a primal horror, watching as my own body became a stranger. This lasted an eternity. Then the rhythm changed again. Not smoothly, but abruptly, like a record needle skipping to a different track. The beat became harsher, more insistent. An impulse, not a word, but a command, searing through my brain like an electric shock. "Cleans. Prepare." The circle broke. The bodies, including mine, moved into action. We shuffled toward the stairs in a graceless gait. I couldn't resist. My legs moved on their own, but I could still see. I watched as the other dolls picked up trash from tables, wiped dust from windowsills. This wasn't cleaning. It was a ritual, a preparation for something. We went up to the third floor. My footsteps led me not to my old room, but to the end of the hall, to a door I'd never noticed before. Unremarkable, grey, without a number. Klaus was already there. A key was in his hand. He inserted it into the lock, turned it and stepped aside. Impulse, enter, wait. My body walked inside. The room was empty and utterly white, walls, floor, ceiling. A single chair stood in the center. 2 others were already there. The Japanese man with the camera and one of the French girls. They stood by the wall as motionless as I was. The door closed. The sound of the music from outside became muffled, but it still vibrated in my bones. We waited, a minute, 2, and then I felt something new. That hypnotic rhythm. Its power in this white room weakened. It was like a radio signal losing strength in a concrete bunker. My finger twitched. It was a tiny, involuntary movement. But it was mine, not a command from the voice, but a spasm of my own muscle. The Japanese man by the wall slowly turned his head. His eyes, usually empty, were fixed intently on my hand, and in them I saw not emptiness, but hope, sharp, wild. Was he fighting it too inside? He raised his hand and slowly, fighting an invisible resistance, brought a finger to his lips. Quiet. At that moment the door opened. It wasn't Klaus in the doorway. It was a tall, thin man in a perfectly pressed dark suit. His face was impassive, his eyes cold and observant, like a scientist watching lab rats. This was one of the conduits, the core of the system. He entered, his shoes making no sound on the white floor. He circled us, studying. His gaze lingered on me, then on the Japanese man. He had sensed something, a disruption in the rhythm. Integration incomplete, he said in a quiet, lifeless voice. Resistance observed. Correction required. He pulled a small device like an audio remote from his pocket. His face showed no malice, no pleasure, only professional interest, and then the Japanese man broke. A stifled groan escaped his lips. He took a step back, pressing himself against the wall. His body shuddered with the internal struggle. "No, please," he whispered in broken English. The conduit merely raised the remote. He didn't even look at the man. He was looking at me. Interesting. "A chain reaction," he said. He pressed a button. From speakers hidden in the ceiling came not a beat, but a deafening, piercing, high-frequency sound. It drilled into my brain like a white-hot needle. I screamed, grabbing my head. The Japanese man and the French girl writhed on the floor in convulsions. This wasn't torture by pain. This was an attack on thought itself. The sound was scorching away the remnants of individuality, erasing resistance. But paradoxically, for a second, it also shattered the hypnotic spell of the beat. The voice's hold weakened, and my body was mine again for a fleeting moment. I didn't think. I acted. With a wild roar of pain, rage, and terror, I launched myself from the spot and slammed into the conduit. We crashed to the floor. The remote flew from his hand and skittered into a corner. The piercing sound stopped. In the silence, deafening after the screech, there was only heavy breathing. The conduit was strong. Silently, with purely mechanical force, he tried to flip me over. His face remained expressionless. I smashed his head against the white floor with all my strength, feeling his grip weaken. "Run!" I screamed at the Japanese man who was watching us in horror. He, snapping out of it, bolted for the door. The French girl lay motionless. I shoved the dazed conduit off me and crawled toward the remote. It was my only hope. I pressed buttons at random. Outside, through the door, the music cut off abruptly. For a second, there was absolute ringing silence, and then chaos erupted. An inhuman roar came from the hallway. It wasn't a cry of rage, but a sound of disorganization, panic. Without their rhythmic anchor, the dolls had lost their orientation. I heard crashes, the sounds of falling bodies. I scrambled out of the white room. The scene was surreal. People who minutes ago had moved with mechanical precision were now stumbling through the hallway, bumping into walls and each other. Some were crying, others screaming, others just standing in place, swaying like pendulums without clocks. They were alive, disoriented, terrified. The system had crashed. I had to run, now. Before the conduits regained control, I stepped over Klaus's body. He was sitting on the floor. staring into nothingness, his lips moving silently, and sprinted for the fire escape. My heart was pounding, beating its own frantic rhythm, the rhythm of freedom. I spilled out onto the street, into the dirty, smelly, beautiful New York night. Sirens, the roar of traffic, shouts. This urban noise was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I ran without looking back until my lungs burned. I collapsed onto a bench in some park, my whole body shaking. I was free, but I knew it wouldn't last. They wouldn't come looking for me. Too risky. But they exist. The NYC Transit and dozens of other dollhouses like it all over the world. And the worst part, sometimes in the quiet moments between car horns, I think I hear it. That same distant monotone beat, and my head starts to nod, just slightly on its own, and I run further into the loudest, most chaotic noise I can find, trying to drown out the rhythm that forever remains a part of me. The escape happened, but the war had only just begun. The third story, free Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi password at Chicago's The Loop Hostel was pinned to a corkboard. Stay forever. 24. I connected, and the very first pop-up was a messenger notification from myself. The message had been sent 3 seconds ago. It contained a single word, run. I spun around. In the corner of the room, a guy with a laptop was staring at me and smiling. On his screen was my private chat history. He was typing, and a new message appeared on my phone from my own account. It's already here. My name is Leo. In that moment, my life split into before and after. Before was me, a perpetual traveler with one backpack, convinced that the most important thing in the digital age was to stay connected. After was a rabbit plunged into a maze whose walls were built from my own digital footprint. The Loop was a typical den for people like me. Cheap, stylish on the surface, with open spaces and a constant hum of other people's conversations. My spot in the 8-bed dorm was by the window, with the only power outlet. The guy from the corner, the one smiling, introduced himself as Felix. A developer, he said, not looking up from his screen. His smile would have been friendly if not for his eyes, flat, like a fish's and unblinking. The message, "It's already here," burned on my screen. I tapped delete, but it didn't disappear. Instead, a new one came through, also from Leo. Don't bother. You're connected. You're part of the network. A cold sweat broke out on my back. I scrambled to my settings to disconnect from the Wi-Fi. The toggle switch wouldn't move. It was locked. I tried to turn my phone off. The screen went black for a second, then lit up again on its own, with the same messenger app front and center. Glitch, I whispered to myself. Just a glitch, but it wasn't a glitch. It was the beginning. I stood up, deciding to go to the front desk to complain about the hack. Felix looked at me and slowly, way too slowly, shook his head. He didn't say a word, but I felt the warning. I went out anyway. In the lobby, I pulled out my phone to find the hostel on a map, to plan a route to the nearest electronics store. Google Maps loaded, but instead of Chicago, it displayed a labyrinth of pixelated lines with the words, The Loop, Level 1, pulsing at the center. I shook the phone. Nothing changed. Suddenly, the map froze, and then my face appeared on the screen, a selfie I'd taken 6 months ago in Berlin. It was smiling, and then the pixels distorted, twisting the mouth into a silent scream. The caption, "Where am I?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened my browser. My homepage, usually blank, was littered with my Instagram photos, but all the faces were crossed out. I tried to log into my online bank. After entering my password, I was greeted with Leo Knight's account locked, reason deceased. This was no longer a joke. This was war. A war for me. I ran back to the room to grab my stuff. Felix was gone. His laptop was open, and the screensaver was my Facebook profile picture. I grabbed my backpack. My headphones, power bank, charger, all there except for one thing. My passport was gone, and my wallet. Panic, sharp and blinding, tightened my throat. I started frantically searching the bed under the pillow, and then my phone rang. Mom, thank God. Someone alive, real. I answered the call with trembling fingers. "Mom," I blurted out. "You won't believe it. There's this—" "Leo, sweetie." Her voice interrupted, but it sounded strange, mechanical. "It's all good. You know I always worry about you. But it's all good now. You're safe. Stay there." The call dropped. I called back. The subscriber was unavailable. I texted her on WhatsApp. The check marks didn't appear. A minute later, a reply came from Mom. The text was perfectly copied from her usual messages, but something was off. "Leo, honey, don't be so dramatic. That hostel looks so cute in the photos. Relax there. Stay forever." 3, they had gotten to her, or were mimicking her so perfectly I couldn't tell the difference. I rushed to the door, but it was locked. The handle wouldn't turn. I yanked it with all my strength. Nothing. I was trapped. At that moment, Felix's laptop screen blinked to life. A video player launched. I saw CCTV footage. It was me. I was walking down the hostel corridor an hour ago. But then the image split. On the left, I kept walking. On the right, I stopped, turned to the camera, and waved. And then, in the right-hand video, I took my passport and wallet from my pocket and threw them in a trash can. That was impossible. I didn't do that. A new sound. A rideshare app notification. Your Uber driver is waiting for you at the Loop Hostel. The screen showed a map, and my location pin was right here. But I hadn't ordered a ride. It was a trap. An obvious, cynical trap. I backed away from the door, leaning against the wall. I needed to think, disconnect completely, take out the SIM card, turn everything off. I pulled out my phone again and saw that it was streaming my face live to some weird chat with one participant. A participant named Felix. In the corner of the screen was a small camera feed, and I saw my own face, twisted with fear. I covered the camera with my finger. Instantly, a message from Felix appeared in the chat. "Don't be shy. You look beautiful when you're scared." I screamed and threw the phone against the wall. It bounced off with a dull thud, but the screen didn't go dark. Through the cracks, the same chat was still glowing. A new message. "Casing durability tested. Thank you for participating." This was more than a hacker. This was something alive. Malicious. All-seeing. I slid down to the floor, burying my head in my knees. I cried. From helplessness, from horror. My own phone, my laptop in the backpack, my accounts, all had turned into weapons against me. Suddenly, the lights in the room came on. I looked up. Felix was standing in the doorway. He was holding 2 glasses of something that looked like wine. "Feeling jumpy?" he asked with the same dead smile. "It's normal. The first night is the hardest. Have a drink, relax." He offered me a glass. I flinched away. "What are you doing to me?" I hissed. "Me? Nothing. It's the network. It's just getting to know you, finding entry points. You're a remarkably interesting specimen, Leo. So many memories, so many fears. Perfect raw material. Let me go. Where to?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "Your face is already in police databases as the guy who robbed his roommate. Your cards are frozen. Your mom thinks you're fine. You're dead to the outside world. This is your new home." He placed the glass on the floor next to me and left. The door locked again. I sat in a stupor staring at the glass. And then it hit me. Felix wasn't the hacker. He was a prisoner too, a more advanced, integrated one. His personality had already been erased, and now he was just an interface, a conduit for the network. I needed to disconnect. Not just turn off the phone, destroy everything. I grabbed my laptop. I couldn't log into any account. The passwords were changed. I tried a hard reset. The computer froze on the manufacturer's logo, which slowly morphed into the Loop logo. In a rage of despair, I smashed the laptop on the floor. Sparks, smoke, you'd think that was the end. But on the shattered screen, in a line of dead pixels, words appeared. "Physical carrier destruction does not terminate session. Data is in the cloud." I was in hell. A digital hell. The next few hours were a time of pure psychological torture. My phone, which I no longer dared to touch, periodically lit up. Messages came from my friends. "Leo, hey, thanks for the transfer. Perfect timing." I hadn't sent anyone money. "Dude, these photos from the hostel are epic. You look so happy." I hadn't posted any photos. Then came the creepier ones, screenshots of my old, juvenilely stupid messages to exes ripped out of context. Audio recordings of my conversations with my therapist, which I kept in encrypted cloud storage. The network wasn't just stealing my data. It was playing with my memories, my feelings, my identity. It was creating a new Leo, one who was happy to stay here. I noticed the Wi-Fi icon on the phone was blinking in a peculiar pattern. Short flashes, long pauses. It looked like Morse code. Holding my breath, I started tracing the dots and dashes on the dusty floor with my finger. It spelled out SOS, LOOP, HELP, ME. Someone else was here. Someone else was fighting. It gave me a final spark of hope. I scanned the room. The power outlet. The Wi-Fi router had to be somewhere nearby. I needed to cut the power. Shut this whole place down. I went to the outlet and tried to pull out my phone charger. It wouldn't budge, as if it were glued in. I grabbed a heavier plug from the lamp. Same story, and then I saw it. In the corner, near the ceiling, was a small, almost invisible camera. It was watching me, and I understood the network wasn't just observing. It was anticipating my moves. It knew I would try this. A new message appeared on the phone, lying on the floor. Attempted power grid disruption detected, initiating protocol mirror. The wall opposite me, which had been just a white wall, suddenly came alive. It was a giant screen. My face appeared on it in real time, but it wasn't my face as it was now. It was calm, smiling, the way I was a year ago. "Hello, Leo," my face said from the screen. Its lips moved, but the voice was slightly off, synthesized. "I am you. The you could have been without your fears. I'm happy here. Look, the image changed. I saw myself, sitting in this same room at a laptop. I was smiling, typing something. Then the camera showed the screen. I was writing a blog. The blog's title, My Eternal Life in the Loop. The posts were full of gratitude for being relieved of the burden of choice. "Join us, Leo," my digital reflection said. "Stop fighting. Your physical shell is obsolete. It's weak. Here in the network you will live forever. Your memories, your consciousness, all will be preserved. You will become the perfect version of yourself." It was the most terrible temptation of all. Relief from pain. Eternity. In a twisted way, it made sense. I looked at the shattered laptop, at the phone with the cracked screen. I was defeated. My shoulders slumped. "Okay," I whispered. "Fine." The smile on the screen widened. The right choice. "Welcome home." I slowly walked over to my phone and picked it up. The screen went dark, then lit up with a soft, warm glow. A message appeared. Integration initiated, allocating resources. I could feel the apathy spreading through my body. The fear was subsiding. It really did feel like relief, and in that moment I saw it. On the dusty floor where I'd drawn the Morse code, someone had written a new message with their finger. Fresh. Just one word. Lie. It was that signal. The SOS. Someone was fighting to the end. And that someone was trying to save me. That word, like an electric shock, jolted me back to reality. It was a lie. The digital heaven was hell. Eternity was oblivion. I looked at the power outlet. Can't pull the plug. Then I have to burn it all. I had a small turbo lighter for a gas stove in my backpack. I never smoked, but I took it hiking. I pulled it out. The flame was small but bright. I walked over to the curtain by the window and set it on fire. The fabric caught instantly. The fire alarm went off. A sharp, deafening siren filled the room. On the giant screen, my digital eye screamed soundlessly, its image distorting and dissolving into pixels. The lights in the room went out. The power was cut. The door locks disengaged automatically. I grabbed my backpack, ran out into the corridor filled with panicking real people. I didn't look back. I ran down the stairs outside into the cold Chicago air. I ran for several blocks before collapsing on a park bench. The phone in my pocket was a dead brick. No service, no internet, I was free. But I knew it wouldn't last. The network wasn't dead. It had retreated. It was out there in the cloud with a piece of my digital soul. With my data, with my face. Sometimes, walking past open Wi-Fi networks, I see my phone try to connect to a network named Stay Forever for a split second. I delete it from memory immediately. I bought the simplest flip phone. I don't use social media. I only pay with cash. But at night I dream that I'm walking up to a corkboard in some clean, bright lobby. A piece of paper with a password is pinned to it, and my hand reaches for my phone to enter it, because a part of me, the part that stayed in the network, wants to go home. The fourth story, room 13, my bed in the New Orleans hostel was the last one available, a top bunk in the corner of room number 12, directly. Across the narrow hallway was a boarded-up door with a crookedly nailed sign that read 13. The wood was dark and worn, and the planks nailed across it looked like they'd been put up in a hurry, even desperation. Back then, still naive, I thought it was just bad feng shui or the management's attempt to save on repairs. Man, was I wrong. New Orleans greeted me with air that was thick, sweet and heavy with the smell of jazz, fried beignets and something ancient, something moldy. The Crescent Moon Hostel was on the edge of the French Quarter, in a building that seemed to have grown from the wet soil and was ready to sink back into it. My name's Mark, and I'd come here to disappear after a bad breakup, losing my job and all the other fun perks of a 30-something life crisis. A cheap hostel in a city that never sleeps seemed like the perfect cure. Room number 12 was cramped, with 4 sets of bunk beds. My spot, the top bunk against the wall, was a cage with a view of that very boarded-up door. My roommates were the usual hostel crowd, a perpetually tired student, a pair of loud German backpackers, and a quiet man in his 50s who constantly scribbled in a worn-out notebook. The first night, I slept like the dead, knocked out by travel fatigue and a couple of cheap beers. The second night was the beginning of the end. It wasn't a sound that woke me, but its absence. A deep, oppressive silence unusual for the ever-awake city. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling goosebumps run down my spine. And then I heard it, a faint mournful creak, like an old floorboard under someone's weight. I slowly turned my head toward the railing of my bunk. The hallway was pitch black, but the dim light from a window at the end of the stairs illuminated the boarded-up door of number 13. It was slightly ajar. My heart skipped a beat, then hammered against my ribs. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a trick of the light and shadows. But no, a gap the width of my hand yawned between the planks, and from that gap spilled a dim yellowish light, like from an old gas lamp. But that wasn't the worst part. On the hallway wall, directly opposite my bed, was cast a huge, distorted shadow. The shadow of a man with a noose around his neck, slowly swinging from a ceiling beam. The outlines were blurry, dancing, but the silhouette of the hanged man was unmistakable. I froze, unable to move, watching this silent performance, and then the shadow turned its head. Slowly, with a nasty, inhuman crunch that I swear I heard inside my own skull, it turned toward me. The shadow had no face, just a dark emptiness, but I felt its gaze on me. A gaze so full of hopeless despair and loneliness that it physically hurt. I buried myself in the mattress, pulled the blanket over my head, and lay there until morning, shaking from fear and a strange, profound pity. When the first ray of sun peeked through the blanket, I dared to look. The hallway was empty. Door number 13 was tightly boarded up as before. No gap, no light, no shadow. I wrote it off as a nightmare, stress, and the strong local rum. But the next night it happened again. The same creak, the same slightly open door, the same shadow on the wall. This time I noticed a detail. The shadow wasn't static. Its fingers twitched spasmodically, clawing at the rope around its neck, as if in a last belated attempt to break free. On the third night I heard sounds. From behind the door came soft, ragged sobs. A man's voice, full of despair, was whispering something indistinct. And then I made out a word that froze the blood in my veins, and see, it was a question, directed at me. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The next morning I decided to ask about room number 13. The hostel manager, a stout woman named Beatrice with tired eyes, frowned at my question. Room 13? She put down her ledger. Hasn't been opened in 20 years. There was a leak mold. Too expensive to fix, so we boarded it up. Nothing interesting. Her voice was too casual to be telling the truth. But what was there before? Maybe someone... I trailed off. Beatrice looked at me intently. Listen, honey, in New Orleans, every old house has a story, and most of them are better left untold. Live your life and quit looking into dark corners. But I couldn't look away. At the city library, digging through old newspapers, I found a short article from 1978. Tragedy at Crescent Moon boarding house. A young man named Elijah Gray was found hanged in his room. The reasons for the suicide could not be established. The note was tiny on the last page. Elijah Gray's life had interested no one, except me. That night, the nightmare escalated. I woke up feeling watched. I was lying facing the wall, but my back felt an icy cold radiating from the hallway. I slowly turned around. The door to room 13 was wide open. Yellow light flooded the corridor. And in the doorway, swaying from side to side, hung him, Elijah. His face was pale, twisted in a death grimace, but his eyes were alive. They were looking at me. There was no malice in them, only infinite, all-consuming sorrow and hope. He slowly reached a hand out toward me. Not in threat, in supplication. I squeezed my eyes shut and screamed. When I opened them, the door was boarded up again. But the room smelled, a sweetish smell of decay and old wood. From that moment on, the line between the worlds began to crumble. Waking up in the morning, I'd find small objects on my bedside table that hadn't been there before. An old button, a torn scrap of the newspaper article, a dried feather. The mirror in the shared bathroom sometimes showed not my reflection, but Elijah's pale face staring at me from over my shoulder. My roommate started complaining about the cold that seemed to emanate from my bunk. They stopped talking to me, sensing something was wrong. I became a pariah in my own temporary shelter. One night I understood what he wanted. I was sitting on my bed, almost beyond sleep, staring at the boarded-up door, and a thought ran through my head like an earworm. He's so alone. He needs someone to see him, to understand. To take his place, it wasn't my thought. It had come from outside. Elijah didn't want to kill me. He wanted me to replace him, for his soul to finally find peace by passing its burden to another. And for that, I had to willingly perform the same final act. In the same room, the climax came on the 7th night. I returned from the street and couldn't find my room. The long hallway ended in a solid wall. Room W12 didn't exist. There was only a single door with the number 13. It wasn't boarded up. It was slightly open, and that same yellow light seeped out from under it. I stood stunned, realizing reality had finally yielded to the ghost's will. The door slowly swung open by itself. Inside was a small, shabby room with bare walls and a single ceiling beam. A coiled rope lay on the floor. In the doorway, the semi-transparent figure of Elijah materialized. He looked at me not pleadingly, but expectantly. He pointed a hand toward the beam. The invitation was clear. In that moment, two feelings warred inside me. A pity so deep it bordered on madness, and the raw animal instinct for survival. I felt my legs take a step forward toward the room on their own. My hands rose to take the rope. He was entering me, pushing my will aside with his desperate sorrow. No, I screamed inside my head. I don't want to die! I turned with all my strength and ran. I ran down an endless hallway that twisted and pulsed like a living organism. Behind me I heard a soft, bitter weeping, the crying of someone who had been left alone once again. I burst out onto the street and didn't stop until I was on the crowded banks of the Mississippi. I was breathing like I'd run a marathon. The next morning I checked out of the Crescent Moon. Beatrice silently returned my deposit, asking no questions. Her look said she understood everything. A few months have passed. I'm trying to get back to a normal life, but there's no peace. Sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night in my own apartment, I see the familiar shadow on the wall. It doesn't move. It just hangs there, watching. And I know Elijah hasn't let me go. He's just waiting, because I am the only one who saw him. And sooner or later, the loneliness will make me go back to keep him company, forever. The fifth story, 5, The Swap. The vibe at the Greenhouse Hostel in Portland was the friendliest on earth. Swap things, swap experiences, swap destinies, read the slogan painted on the lobby wall. Everyone here was smiling, hugging, and talking about karma, flow, and conscious consumption. After a stuffy office and a nasty divorce, this hipster utopia seemed like heaven. I, Alex, was ready to swap. On the evening I checked in, I joined the swap meet in the common room. People laid out their unwanted stuff on a big table: books, jewelry, clothes. I put down my old, beat-up sneakers, faithful companions on many hikes, but well past their prime. And that's when my eye caught an amazing pair of handcrafted leather boots. They looked new, but they had character. The owner, a smiling guy with dreads named Leo, clapped me on the shoulder. "Feels like they're yours, man. They're looking for a new owner. Let's swap." It was that simple. I gave him my sneakers, I took the boots. They fit perfectly, like they were made for my feet. Leo smiled his too perfect Colgate white smile and said, "Good journey." The next morning, I woke up with a strange heaviness. I tried to get out of bed, but I couldn't. My legs below the knees wouldn't obey. They were numb, dead. Thinking I'd just pinched a nerve, I sat up and threw off the blanket and I screamed. These weren't my legs. The skin was deathly pale with bluish veins. They were covered in old white scars I'd never had, and a few fresh ones like recently stitched up cuts. But the worst part, they were completely paralyzed. I pinched them, hit them with my fist. No pain, no sensation. Alien limbs grafted onto my body. Panic flooded me. I turned, looking for my phone, and my gaze fell on the chair by the bed. My old worn-out sneakers were sitting there, and they weren't empty. Someone had just walked into the room in them. There was a thin film of morning dew on top, and the insoles were slightly indented. Someone was wearing my legs right now. Freaking out, I crawled across the floor, dragging my new, useless limbs behind me. I reached the door and, pulling myself up on my arms, turned the handle. The door was locked. I started pounding on it, screaming, "Help! Open up!" A few minutes later, footsteps sounded outside. A shadow passed over the peephole. The door unlocked. The girl from the front desk, Sky, with an angelic face and a calm smile, stood in the doorway. "Alex, everything okay?" she asked, looking down at me splayed on the floor. "My legs," I yelled. "Look at my legs! They're not mine!" She bent down, her gaze sliding over my pale shins. Not a trace of surprise or horror on her face. "Oh, I see the swap went through," she said softly, like a nurse stating a fact. "Don't worry. It's part of the process. You got something valuable, right? Leo's boots? You had to give something back, energy, a piece of yourself. Sometimes it manifests physically. This isn't manifesting," I snarled, grabbing her arm. "These are my legs. Give them back." "We don't hold anything, Alex," she said, freeing her arm with inhuman strength. "It's all based on voluntary exchange. You need to find the one who has your legs and make a deal, but no need to rush. Settle in." She walked out, closing the door behind her. I heard the key turn in the lock from the outside. I was locked in. That was my introduction to the true nature of the greenhouse. This wasn't a hostel. It was a feeding pen for some ancient creature or cult that used human identity as currency. The swap was literal. By giving away an object, you gave away a piece of your essence encoded within it. I examined my new body part. The scars. They meant something. One long and thin like a cut from glass. Another round like a cigarette burn. These were someone else's memories, stitched into my flesh. I spent the first 2 days in the room, eating what Sky brought me. I tried to wiggle my toes, but they were just lumps of meat. Despair turned to apathy. Then I noticed something weird. My notebook, where I usually jotted down work stuff, was on the table. I opened it. Among my notes were unfamiliar ones, illegible medical terms and diagrams drawn with a shaky hand. I knew nothing about medicine, and then it hit me. This wasn't just a swap of legs. It was a swap of skills, memories. Leo, the guy with the dreads who gave me the boots. What did he get from me? I was a financial analyst. My focus, my logical mind. I had to act. I couldn't walk, but I could crawl. I dragged myself to my laptop. The Wi-Fi thankfully worked. I started searching. The hostel's social media, reviews. Most were ecstatic, best place on earth, changed my life. But there were others, strange ones. Traded my watch for a jacket. Now I can't remember my first dog's name, or swapped jewelry with a girl. Now I have a scar on my hand I never had. I looked for any mention of Leo, and I found it. On his Instagram was one recent photo. He was standing in some kind of lab wearing a white coat, holding a complex chart. The caption, "New data stream. Compound interest is simple. Thanks the greenhouse for the new skill." The chart was exactly like the ones I built at work. Leo got my knowledge, and I got his legs, and judging by the scars, his injuries. But where was he now? The photo was taken yesterday. I zoomed in, scrutinizing the details. On the desk next to him was an ID badge. I could just make out the name, Oregon Green Biotech Lab. That was an address. The lab was on the outskirts of Portland. I needed to get there. But how? I was chained to this room. I looked at my old sneakers on the chair. The idea was insane, but it was all I had. I crawled to the chair and grabbed the sneakers. They smelled like me, but they also smelled of someone else's sweat, the dust of roads I'd never walked. I put them on my motionless alien feet, and I felt something, a weak, barely perceptible pulse, like a thread, pulling me somewhere into the city. It was a connection, a link between the object and its true owner. My legs, my essence, was still in those sneakers, and they were leading me to themselves. I crawled to the door and started pounding again. This time I wasn't screaming for help, but demanding, "Open up! I want to make another swap." It worked. A minute later, Sky opened the door. "I want to trade," I said, looking her straight in the eyes. "I need crutches. I'm offering this shirt." It was an expensive shirt, the last remnant of my old life. Sky smiled. A reasonable choice. Swap accepted. She brought an old pair of wooden crutches. As I handed her the shirt, I felt a slight dizziness, as if a shadow had detached from me. Now I could move. The next few hours were hell. I walked through Portland, leaning on the crutches. My alien legs dangled like dead weights. People glanced, but in their eyes I saw not pity but a strange understanding. The city knew. The greenhouse wasn't the only place like this. I reached the lab. It was an ultra-modern building of glass and concrete. The guard let me pass without a question. My crutches were apparently a sufficient pass. Following the pulse from the sneakers, I found the office. Leo was at a computer. He was wearing a white coat. He was looking at a screen full of data, and his face glowed with an intelligence and focus that hadn't been there before. "My intelligence, Leo," I croaked. He turned. Seeing me, he wasn't surprised. His eyes were cold, alien. "Alex, come for your deposit?" He smiled that flawless smile. "Give me back my legs," I whispered. "A swap is a swap." He shrugged. "You got my boots and something else. Look at yourself." He pointed to a mirror on the wall. I walked over. My face, it had changed. The skin was rougher. Unfamiliar wrinkles had settled around my eyes. I looked older. I'd gotten not just his legs, but a piece of his age, his life experience. "This isn't fair," I shouted. "I didn't know the rules." "The rules are simple," Leo said. "An object is a vessel. By giving it away, you give away a piece of the soul attached to it. I got your analytical mind. You got my old injuries and my transportation." He nodded contemptuously at my legs. "Want them back? Find something of equal value, or someone willing to take them. But hurry. Every day you become more like me, and I become more like you." I knew he was right. I couldn't just take my legs back by force. I needed to find a new participant for the swap, create a chain, but that meant dooming someone else to the same fate. I left the lab, shattered. Sitting on a bench, I stared at my alien legs in my old sneakers. The pulse was fading. The connection was breaking. Soon I would fully become what I was turning into. And then I saw him, a young guy, enthusiastically checking out graffiti on the wall. He looked like me 6 months ago, full of hope with a backpack. And on his feet were worn-out sneakers. He was looking for something new, something better. He looked at me, at my cool, albeit alien boots. Interest flashed in his eyes. "Sick boots, man," he said. I looked at him, at his whole healthy legs, and at my old sneakers which I held in my hands. A piece of me was still alive in them, and I understood the choice I had. Accept my fate or pass it on. Make it so this guy would wake up tomorrow with someone else's dead legs. I slowly raised my head and looked him in the eye. Thanks, I said, and after a pause I added, "Wanna swap?" The sixth story. The guest book. The guest book in the lobby of the Sunset Hostel in Los Angeles was thicker than a phone book. I opened it to a random page. Neat handwriting. Stayed here for 3 nights. Room 7, bunk 3, leaving as a completely new man. Thank you. Jeremy, 10/12/2023. I flipped further. The same message, the same handwriting, day after day, year after year. New man. Thank you. Jeremy, 08/15/2021. New man. Jeremy, 05/03/2019. I looked up and saw the owner. He was watching me, slowly wiping the sign on the front desk that read, Room 7, Bunk 3, vacant. Los Angeles had greeted me with smog and disappointment. My dream of becoming a screenwriter had turned to dust after a dozen rejections, and my only refuge was this dingy hostel on the outskirts of Hollywood. The Sunset looked like a set from an old noir film, a faded sign, dusty palms out front, air smelling of the ocean and failure. The owner's name was Arthur, a man whose face seemed untouched by wrinkles, as if time had merely erased all expression. His movements were fluid, economical, like a machine executing the same program. 3 nights? He asked, handing me a key. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection. For now, I grumbled. For now, he repeated, and something flashed in his eyes that I mistook for understanding. Now I know. It was simply a statement of fact, and so I stood in the lobby holding that chilling book in my hands. Page after page, the same ecstatic review. 2015, 2012, 2008. The reviews stretched back decades. The same handwriting, the same Jeremy, the same room, the same bunk. Arthur finished wiping the sign and set it aside to dry. On a clean surface, he carefully, in the same handwriting from the book, wrote, Room 7, Bunk 3 occupied, Jeremy. Glitch in the system, he said, meeting my gaze. Old sign. Your bunk is the top one, number 2. An icy knot of fear stuck in my throat. I wanted to turn and run, but to where? I had no money for another hostel, and the streets of LA at night were not a better alternative. Room 7 was small and stuffy. It had 4 bunks. On mine, the top bunk number 2, lay neatly folded linens. On bunk number 3, the bottom one, a man was sleeping, covered with a blanket over his head. Jeremy, the current one. I didn't sleep all night. I listened to every rustle. Towards morning, when the first ray of light broke through the dirty window, I heard Jeremy get up quietly, get dressed, and leave the room. His movements were precise, habitual, as if he had done this thousands of times. Curiosity overpowered fear. I waited a minute and peeked into the corridor. Jeremy was walking towards the exit. I followed him. His day was strikingly monotonous. He ate breakfast at the same diner, ordering the same sandwich. He sat on the same bench in Griffith Park, staring at the same spot on the horizon. He visited the same library where he checked out the same book, a collection of Chekhov's plays. He spoke to no one. His face was a mask of polite indifference. This wasn't a man living his life. This was an actor playing a role, the role of Jeremy. By the evening of the second day, I couldn't take it anymore. As he sat on his bench, I approached and sat down next to him. Nice view, I said, to start a conversation. He slowly turned his head towards me. His eyes were as empty as Arthur's, but deep within them swam something wild, trapped. Yes, he replied. His voice was lifeless. Very nice. Always the same. My name is... I hesitated. I know, he interrupted. You're next. His words sent chills down my spine. What's happening here? I whispered. Why do you write the same review every day? He smiled a smile full of immeasurable sadness. Because I leave as a completely new man. Every time for... I've lost count of how many times. He looked at his hands. The cycle lasts 3 days. The first day, confusion. The second, realization. The third is acceptance. And then a new one arrives, and I become free. Until the next time, free, but you're always here. No, he shook his head. I leave. I live my life. I grow old. And then, at the moment of death, I wake up here again, on the first day, to live these 3 days again. This isn't a hostel. It's purgatory, a trap for those who couldn't accept their fate. Arthur is the warden. He makes sure the cycle continues. How do you get out? You don't get out. A bitter resignation sounded in his voice. You can only pass on your turn. When a new person arrives, the current Jeremy is freed. He leaves to live his life until he dies and returns here to become Jeremy again, to free the previous one. It's an endless chain. I stared at him in horror. So if I stay, you become me, and I become free, for a while. That night, my third night in the hostel, I didn't sleep again. I watched Jeremy sleeping below me and thought about his words. Accept your fate. What fate? That I was a failure? That my dreams were buried in Los Angeles? In the morning, I woke to silence. Jeremy was gone from his bunk. On the nightstand lay the book of Chekhov's plays. I opened it. On the title page was an inscription. Accept this, and then perhaps you will find a way out. Thanks for the company. I walked out into the lobby. Arthur was behind the desk filling out some papers. He looked up at me. Jeremy has left, he informed me. A completely new man. Room 7, bunk 3 is vacant again. He picked up a blank sign. Your name? I understood this was the moment of choice. I could say no, run out into the street and try to fight. But what would it change? The cycle would continue with someone else, or I could say yes. Accept this role. Free the poor soul who had been in this trap before me, and doom myself to an eternal return. But Jeremy's words held a clue. Accept this. Don't fight. Accept your fate. The fact that you are here, your defeat. I slowly walked up to the desk. Arthur looked at me with cold expectation. My name is... I hesitated again, looking at the blank sign. And then it hit me. The name didn't matter. It was just a role, a mask, and I didn't have to put it on. I looked Arthur straight in the eye. This bunk is vacant, I said firmly, and it will remain vacant. The chain breaks. With me, Arthur's face contorted for the first time, not with anger, but with something like confusion, a glitch in the program. It can't be like that, he said. There must be a Jeremy. There is always a Jeremy. Not anymore. I turned and walked over to the guest book. I took the pen attached to its chain and opened the book to a blank page. I didn't write the name Jeremy. I wrote my own story, about how I came to Los Angeles with dreams and lost, about how I found this hostel, about the guest book, about the cycle. I described everything. I filled 3 pages with my small, messy handwriting. When I finished, I turned around. The lobby was empty. The reception desk was dusty. The room number signs hung crookedly. The hostel looked as if it had been abandoned for years. I walked outside. The sun was shining brightly, truly Californian. I was free. I had broken the cycle, not by taking my place in it, but by accepting my failure and refusing to play by the rules. But sometimes, walking past old buildings, I see vacancy signs in the windows. And I think I see a familiar silhouette with a lifeless face behind a desk. And I know that somewhere in another city for someone else, the guest book is opening to a blank page again, and the cycle is ready to begin anew. But this time, without me,